I watched every single talk from the Modular Summit, and there's a ton of alpha. Across 3 days, 57 hours worth of content, and 157 videos, you're missing out on a lot. So this video is going to save you a lot of time. It's a summary of every single Modular Summit talk, what I've learned, and if any of these pique your interest, you can watch them on YouTube. So now let's get started with day 1, chisel stage. Unification, solving L2 fragmentation with Avail Nexus. This isn't a talk about Avail's data availability layer, so watch this if you're interested in their proof aggregation to solve L2 fragmentation called Nexus. Next up, we have Modular Expansion, the Celestia technical roadmap by Ismail Khafi from Celestia. This is a nice talk around the big 3 problems in crypto. Blockchains don't scale, they're not verifiable, and bridging sucks. And what's on Celestia's roadmap to solve it. So Ismail talks about fast blocks and slow squares, light node security upgrades, and lazy bridging with ZK accounts. Next up is ensuring data availability in layer 2 scaling solutions by L2Beat. This is a really good overview of rollups and the risks. They talk about the 2 types of rollups, they talk about DA layers, and DAS, and they talk about all the trust assumptions. So watch this if you need a good primer. Next up is a panel, the future of data availability. Now, most panels, people say the same things and agree with each other, but when you put the big names from each DA layer, we're talking Mustafa representing Celestia, Togrul from Scroll representing ETH blobs, Prabal representing Avail, Nima representing Avail DA, and all moderated by L2Beat's Bartek. Things actually get decently spicy. I would watch this one if you're particularly interested in DA technology. Next up is The State of the Modular Union by Mustafa Al-Bassam. This is more of a refresher, so if you want to see the past, present, and then progress of the modular ecosystem, watch this one. Next up, we have The Age of Aggregation. This is a 101 talk about Polygon's ag layer, aka proof aggregation, which is going to be a reoccurring topic throughout the Modular Summit. So watch this if you're not up to speed with proof aggregation. Next up, we have Stylus, bridging the multi-VM to Arbitrum by Ed Felton. This one is on multi-VM WASM-based execution and why it's better. Watch this one if you're interested in VM's developer experience and execution technical talks. Next up, we have how ZK VMs are upgrading the modular stack. This one is a must-watch if you don't know what ZK VMs are. That's all I will really tell you, but I highly recommend. Next up is Client Monogamy, Settle Down and Marry One Already by James Presswich. Watch this if you think client diversity is important, because James can prove you wrong. I like how this is just a realistic talk and how unpractical and expensive client diversity is. Next up, we have Putting Super in Superchain, OP Stack Interoperability. This is a talk about interoperability and the optimism ecosystem, and more specifically, the technicalities of the multi-cross rollup fraud-proof system. Next up, we have Elastic Chains from ZK Sync. This is a talk about cross-chain interop in rollups, but unlike the optimism talk, this is under ZK rollup contracts with ZK proofs, with their ag layer-like system, which they call the Elastic Chain. Next up, we have Virix, Fortifying Decoupled State Machine Replication. This is a very technical talk, and Avalanche is a consensus-heavy project. Watch this if you're into consensus protocols, because this is pretty relevant to all of them. Next up, we have Blended Execution by DynoEggs from Fluent. The Arbitrum Stylus talk was more technical, while this one is more on why and a high-level talk about WASM-based VMs. So you might want to watch both of those and compare the two. Next up, we have Beacon Kit by DevBear from Berachain. This is one that I actually sat through IRL and I really enjoyed it. Got to ask DevBear some questions afterwards. But this wasn't a talk about proof of liquidity. Watch this if you're interested on the EVM identical execution on Comet BFT implementation, which they call Beacon Kit. This is pretty cool stuff. Next up, we have Embracing Modularity, the Future of Blockchain Innovation by Movement. Watch this to get a good overview on the smart contract language of Move, and then why Movement specifically and its architecture. Next up, we have a fireside chat with Mustafa Al-Bassam and Laura Shin. There are very little talks that fall in the category of everybody, no matter who you are, should watch, and this is one of them. Mustafa gets into his hacker days, the inspiration from Satoshi and Ethereum to make Celestia. This one is a must watch. So now we just finished up the chisel stage, and now let's go on to day 1, canvas stage. And first up we got is unlocking liquidity for the modular economy. This is a talk around the success of Ethereum, its high liquidity, capital efficiency, and liquid staking usage, and how its success was dependent on strict staking and simple UX, but how the modular ecosystem has the opposite, with UX fragmentation and native delegation being too easy. So then the founder of Drop Protocol, Mitya Arganov, talks about how to unlock liquidity for the modular economy. Unlike the previous panel, which was about the future of DA with people who sell DA, this panel was about people who use DA and ask questions on why they moved to Celestia and all the factors that rollups have to consider. Next up, we have Discover the Infinite Frontier, Search the Unified Multi-Chain and Multi-VM World. This talk is on the inevitability of the multi-chain and multi-VM world, and how Dora, the block explorer, unifies all this into one on-chain search engine. Next up, we have Introducing Exchange OS. This is a talk on the evolution of modular infra and how centralized exchanges are monolithic. They have high risk, low transparency, and require trust, and how Exchange OS's modular architecture makes it an unruggable exchange. Next up, we have Dark Rollups by Henry de Valence from Penumbra. This talk explores the shielded design space into dark rollups. So DA in a modular system assumes availability and visibility, and in a shielded monolithic system, they're separated. Henry talks about how shielded privacy works, and it's by separating the execution and the visibility for only the users to see. And he talks about the design space and how modular systems and monolithic shields may not be so different. Next up, we have Rollups in the Wild by Andrew Huang from Conduit. This talk is about how rollups can save your startup, the practicality, and then goes through a story about an on-chain game called Pirate Nation, which transitioned from Polygon to Arbitrum to an Arbitrum L3. Lots of talks are theoretical, technical, or far out into the future, and this one is about a real story. Next up is a panel from Apps to Chains. This is a nice realistic conversation from the people who run applications. We have Andrew Hong from Conduit, we have Mike Spain from Lyra, we have Griffin from Halliday, and it's all moderated by Ben Rodriguez from Coinbase. I like him, he's funny. And they all talk about the realities and why applications move to rollups. Next up, we have The Lazy Application Thesis by Jacob Arluck from Celestia. So the Fat Protocol thesis was blockchain platforms like Ethereum would gain all the value. But then Solana apps like Pump.Fun, Radium, and Jito earn more fees than the protocol itself, Solana, which shows the shift from the Fat Protocol thesis to the Fat Profit era. But not everything should be constrained to Solana, the SVM, and Anchor, which brings us on to the Lazy Application thesis. Next up, we have Solving Native Asset Issuance in a Modular Ecosystem. This talk is all about Noble. First is why a blockchain should be dedicated to asset issuance. Then Yelena at Modular Summit announces Euro stablecoin. And then she talks about the user experience and the technology used to solve fragmentation for stablecoins. Next up, we have Exploring WorldCoin, user activity, and the journey to the world chain. This talk is on why WorldCoin, their goals, and getting there. So it's all the mistakes of building for payments only, and then them gaining tractions and users which wanted more than just payments, how WorldCoin was taking up a lot of Optimism's block space, and working towards their own rollup, WorldChain. Next up, we have Learning of Layer 2s by Gelato. Watch this to see the data behind why Gelato thinks there's going to be more L3s deployed, more usage of alternative DA layers, and chains not settling on Ethereum. And then they talk about where the future's headed with more purpose-specific rollups, chain abstraction, and rollup clusters. Next up, we have a panel on sovereign rollups. This is a technical panel on what exactly are sovereign rollups versus settled rollups. And then it talks about the differences with smart contract or the opposite of sovereign rollups, settled rollups. They talk about bridging to sovereign rollups and all those nerdy technical details. I like this one. Next up, we have native intelligence through compute-specific networks. So for Crypto X AI, you need either beefy centralized nodes or a slow and expensive nodes. But you can get the best of both worlds with compute-specific nodes. You have nodes which are specialized for the blockchain, which means they're small and stateful, and the ML AI part is ran on beefy AI-powered stateless nodes. Watch this talk to learn more about this project called Valence. Next up, we have real-time rollups and Bitcoin security. Can we have both? I personally watched this one live. This is about Stargaze's rollup called Astra and how it's optimistic, but it doesn't have the 7-day waiting period, allowing for instant withdrawals, aka a real-time rollup. And it also talks about rollup native yield and using Bitcoin security. Next up, we have a fun panel called Sloths and Lazy Chain. This panel is all about the Celestian Sloth Society and Lazy Chain. This panel is lighthearted and fun, so it's a must-watch if you're into the sloths. Next up, we have Milky Way, a modular staking hub. This talk is on how Milky Way got started into liquid staking, their progress, and then them getting into restaking with their special operator-specific model. And then, last but not least, we have Ritual Talk. This is about the use cases of Crypto X AI. It talks about why you would even need decentralized AI, the current usage, and then the future of it. To be honest, I don't know that much about AI X crypto, but this was pretty interesting. A good example is how they gave an AI chatbot like ChatGPT a wallet with like real money inside and then had people convince them to invest in their Friendtech keys. And that is all for day 1 Chisel and Canvas stage, but we still have 2 more days to go. Now we're on to day 2 Chisel stage, starting with a user's journey of an app developer in designing an app rollup. Cartesi goes to the design space of a rollup and the specific route that they chose. Cartesi is really powerful, so they use the more complex RISC-0, and it's an app-specific rollup because their rollup is literally running a Linux. Cartesi is really cool, and this is a nice overview of the rollup design space. Next up, we have Defund the Dealers, the past, present, and future of liquidity. In this talk, Ethan Buckman gives a history lesson about medieval financing and how they had the idea of clearing debt obligations, and how modern banking only gives this privileges to a few big banks. Defund the Dealers is about instead of paying dealers to exchange value, Cycle's Money does the opposite, allowing anyone to clear out their debt obligations. That was just a small slice, but I highly recommend this talk. Next up is a panel, Protocol Researchers Meet Applications with Users. This panel is with researchers of Ethereum at the infrastructure level and developers of Ethereum at the application level. We have Ken from Uniswap, we have Yissi from Mask, we have Matt Katz from Caldera, Makoto from ENS, Ansgar and Vitalik from Ethereum Foundation, all moderated by Tina from Flashbots. Tina asked about the original vision of Ethereum versus today's roadmap. And it's mostly unchanged, but Vitalik talks about one of these original ideas was also having Ethereum provide decentralized storage. The applications later talk around the immutability of smart contracts, how liquidity is moving off-chain, the MEV implications of all that, and then the future role of Ethereum. Next up, we have a fireside chat. How is the app chain thesis different between Ethereum and Cosmos ecosystems? This panel is with the co-founders of Ethereum and Cosmos, Vitalik and Ethan Buckman, and their ecosystem's largest DEX, which is Ken from Uniswap and Dev from Osmosis. This panel was about the app chain thesis in Cosmos versus how it compares to the application-specific rollups of Ethereum. It was a little bit of a Cosmos row session, and they talk about the expensive price of sovereignty and the trade-offs of composability, but I highly recommend this talk. Next up is the big talk from Vitalik, Ethereum as a platform of platforms for dApps. Vitalik compares the growth of Ethereum from the past 2010s versus the new 2020s. It shifts from infrastructure only being about the L1 to moving to L2s, applications being from pure financial to more diverse use cases, and then wallets being strictly seed phrases to more hybrid multi-sig systems. It's a talk from the one and only Vitalik Buterin. Go watch it. Next up, we have Layer 2s as extensions from Ethereum. And Manuel talks about the idea that rollups should be extensions of Ethereum and not just users of them. They should push and align themselves with Ethereum's values instead of just acting as their own ecosystem. Instead, Ethereum rollups should be the united rollups of Ethereum and acting and feeling as if one large ecosystem. Next up, we have Protocol MEV Capture by Jonah from Blockchain Capital. Jonah first defines MEV and then shows how MEV is captured. This is a research talk around Ethereum's architecture against the MEV games and the type of games that are being played and captured. Next up, we have How to Reason About the Contagion Risk Within the Modular Stack by Tarun from Gauntlet. Tarun talks about auction markets and matching markets, and how modular systems are matching pieces together and are all part of matching markets. Then he talks about these risks, the attack vectors, and then the incentives of the modular stack. Next up, we have a panel called Fat Applications, Protocols, Middleware, or Operators. This panel consists of Fiskanti from Zprime, Justin Drake from the Ethereum Foundation, James Presswich, Ben from Expresso, all moderated by Jacob Arluck from Celestia Labs. This is a nice debate over the FAT protocol versus FAT application thesis and the future of it. They talk about value accrual, commoditization of block spaces, and how obese Ethereum should be, and then which part of the modular stacks are likely to be reintegrated or centralized. Next up, we have the State of MEV 2024 by Yuki from Cerelia Labs. Yuki gives a nice overview of MEV today, the types of MEV like sandwich attacks, arbitrage, and JIT, where all this MEV profit is split, and the future of where all this MEV is going. Next up, we have Gas Matters, new resources of base fee volatility. So you have all these things happening on-chain, that being private transactions from altruistic block builders and MEV boost built blocks. Private altruistic blocks are typically underfilled, making the base fee go down, and MEV boost blocks are typically filled all the way, making the base fee go up. Matt Cullett talks about the latest research in the shift from the base volatility fee going towards MEV boost. This talk is really technical, but also cutting edge. Next up, we have It's All Resource Pricing by John Adler from Celestia Labs. John Adler talks about the resources of a blockchain, the markets on which they are priced, and how different systems have different methods. He goes into Ethereum's old single market, how Ethereum now has a compute and DA market, how Solana has state rent, and how modular systems have DA markets like Celestia and Ethereum, and separate markets for execution being rollups. And so as users interact with blockchains by bidding on their resources, you realize, wait, it's all resource pricing. And John Adler says it's always been. Next up, we have base rollups are based, fork choice rules rule. This is one of my favorite talks, and I had a pleasure to watch it live. Evan talks about centralized block builders' goal to maximize profits at the expense of the applications, and how base rollups don't need multisigs, inherit censorship resistance, and control their own resource pricing and fork choice rule, which means base rollups can control their own ordering and even hard fork. Next up, we have MEV in 2025 by Shia from Flashbots. MEV auctions need to be fast, private, and decentralized, but cryptography is private and decentralized, but too slow. Centralized builders are private and fast, but not decentralized, and public mempools are fast and decentralized, but not private. And later talks about how trusted execution environments, TEEs, perfectly solve all three. Now this talk is less around TEEs individually and more about the implications of them with MEV. That's TEE builders, relayers, and searchers. Next up is a panel called What Application Innovation Can Block Building, Solving, and Sequencing Uniquely Enable? This panel goes to the impact of PBS and MEVBoost and intents and solvers, and how if these truly unlock new applications or just enhance the ones that already exist. This panel is pretty infra heavy with D-Mars from Flashbots, Josh Bowen from Astria, Marcus from Propellerhead, Dan Elitzer from Nascent, and all moderated by Hart Lambert from Across. Next up, we have How to Win Friends and TE Fluence People. Ethan Buckman talks on why people constantly shill TEs, which by definition are trusted execution environments. And so Ethan will try to convince you about TEs. So ZK is not private in a global setting, MPC is too expensive and has no collusion resistance, and FHE is expensive, but MPC can help out. TEs uniquely give us privacy, performance, and affordability, but they aren't perfect. So Ethan goes through the techniques on how to mitigate some of these downsides. Next up, we have the TE stack by Andrew Miller from Flashbots and Cycles. TEs have their caveats, but they're also these cool black boxes that give privacy to anything inside of it, and can be used for every part of the stack and just make applications naturally better. Andrew Miller goes through the stack of the blockchain and explains on how to fortify each layer with TEEs. Next talk is Modular TEE, control your information flow. So you have this valuable order flow, but there's a lack of efficient on-chain auctions, which means auctions get pushed on-chain, which leads to MEV spam. The current options are 1. Embrace the MEV fee market, 2. Play these extremely unpractical games, or 3. Allow apps to integrate, but have opinions on what MEV is acceptable. D-Mars talks about applying TEs to all part of the stacks to give us more control and privacy on the flow of information. Next up, we have unlocking a new dimension of application designs with TE stack. This talk is about the unique properties of TEs and how applications can unlock Web3 levels of composability and programmability in a traditional Web 2 account. And then he gives a demo on how they can help with secure and private coordination. Next up is a panel, OpenTE, a first step towards the ideal chip for crypto. This panel addresses the TE elephant in the room, their vulnerabilities, the trade-offs, and then the ways to solve them. It has Michael Gao from Fabric, Andrew Miller from Flashbot, all moderated by Tarun from Gauntlet. This is a nice talk because it talks about the smaller details about TEs from a builder of one of these chips and a user of it. Next up is the panel, the metagame. Every Modular Summit has this big endgame panel. This one has Ethan Buckman, Mustafa, Andrew Miller, and moderated by Tarun. Anatoly, the founder of Solana, wasn't here, so this panel was about the metagame. This was sort of a check-in and review on the different types of blockchain architecture and how overall they're coming along, their progress, and then the apps that are coming forward. This panel every single year is definitely a must-watch. Next up on day 2, we have the Canvas stage, starting with The Broken Record, a framework of music and power. Laura talks about the broken record being the old, overly complicated, middleman-filled music industry, and how modular blockchains for music could fix all these problems and empower and actually pay artists. Next up is a panel, Creator Tooling in the Modular Era. This panel has Jana Bertram from Rari Foundation, Shane from Stargaze, Bernie from Pixel Wizards, all moderated by Achilles from Celestia. This panel was about creator tooling and why creators choose certain NFT platforms. They talk about how NFTs were niche and unknown, to then OpenSea being known by everyone, and then in the bear market, how these dying platforms switched from artist-focused to trader-focused. How a lot of NFT platforms remove creator royalties to increase volume, and how Rari Chain and Stargaze kept those royalties. This is a really good talk to understand the NFT marketplace industry. Next up, we have a Lens Fireside Chat. Laura Shin interviews Stanley Kulachov about Lens Protocol. Stanley is the founder of the largest lending protocol, Aave, but also founded Lens, the open social media network. Stanley talks around why you even need a social network in the first place, how Lens Protocol initially caught traction on Polygon, and their decision to move over to their own rollup on ZK Sync. Laura Shin is a legendary interviewer, and Stanley is a DeFi OG. This is a pretty good talk, and watch this if you don't know what Lens Protocol is. Next up is a talk called Tools for Scaling Conspiracies. This one was pretty refreshing with a very cool concept. Baz describes a digital speakeasy which helps communities scale. We all have our favorite online communities which got too big and then lost the thing that made them special. Imagine keeping these communities open for anyone to join, but verifying into these digital clubs and communities with on-chain actions and proofs. This is a talk I didn't know I would like until I watched it. Next up is The Recipe. Alexander is one of those experimental creatives that has been playing with Ethereum, NFTs, and on-chain games for a long time. He talks about his hard transition from an indie dev to an on-chain dev, the philosophical role of fun and play, and how sometimes you actually want to lose, and how that ownership is boring when games are supposed to be fun and not about value. He then talks about new possibilities in digital worlds with virtual tourism and donating through gameplay. Next up, we have a talk about from artworks to art chains. This is a great talk about NFTs going beyond monkey pictures and price tags. So art is valued holistically, and it's about the spiritual space in which it exists in. But standalone NFTs fail because the only comparison you can have is through rarity, which is through more expensive monkey pictures. Essentially, NFTs just don't give off aura. You need a setting in which they exist to have some significance. And this is the concept of what art chains can offer. Next up, we have Forming the Anime Industry with Anime Chain. This talk is about how we're living through a modern anime renaissance, and everything around it, from the media to the fan base to the community, is growing. And how Azuki partnered to bring anime IP on-chain using Arbitrum stack called Anime Chain. If you like anime, go give this talk a try. Next up is a panel, Forma, the first sovereign art chain. This panel is about Forma, sovereign rollups, and art chains. We have Jordan, which represents Astria, which uses Forma as a shared sequencer. We have No Sleep John, representing Hyperlane, which bridges TIA to Forma. It's moderated by Achilles, which is the NFT lead of Celestia, who helped start Forma. And then we have Sam Hart from Skip. He's been curating art in New York and has been in the experimental NFT space long before it was cool. This is overall a good talk around Forma's infrastructure, sovereignty, and art chains. Next up, we have building fully on-chain gaming for the masses. Daniel's been fascinated with on-chain games since 2021, and he goes through his lessons as he levels up. From the early failures and experiments, to the experience of chewing glass as a game dev, to then finally the success and the direction of the industry. Next up, we have how geolocalized sharded rollups redefine the future of on-chain compute. So no rollups, and even the fastest industry-leading ones, can actually support on-chain games because they're still too slow. Games historically push the medium, and that medium is compute. We couldn't imagine mobile games 30 years ago, and on-chain games are no different. But rollups need to be performant. So Scott talks about Argus and its high-performance geolocalized rollup shards. Next up, we have building compelling composable games. This talk is about the composability of on-chain games. So we had this indie dev golden era powered by this new accessible tools, and how on-chain games might be close. You're able to have these deep, complex games and have communities mod them. And then with these rich community-made worlds, you can join games together and bridge items into new ways of play. Next up, we have thinking outside the box. Bitcoin brought the idea of digital scarcity, and Ethereum brought programmability, but due to the constraints, these first set of on-chain games and experiments like CryptoKitties died out. But using Starknet's technology, Cartridge builds tools around easily making low latency, dedicated, and cheap on-chain games. And then Terrence teases some games that are in development that are using Cartridge. Next up, we have minimum viable game chain, Validium. Trifle Labs is still in stealth, but this talk is probably the best overview of the benefits of on-chain games. He talks over the current not fun state of these games and the constraints of the infrastructure to make these games in the first place. Then Billy Rennekamp shows a live demo of a game that is fully on-chain and runs in the browser, and how this game fits the proof and transaction constraint size. Next up, we have zero friction happy users happy chain. What if everyone could use the chain? This project is called Happy Chain because on-chain games suck and they're hard to play and make. What if on-chain games had zero friction, simple onboarding, and users don't have to worry about gas? NorSwap talks about why on-chain games in the first place, why they suck, and the experiments that are being ran on Happy Chain. Next up is a panel, Autonomous Worlds and Bespoke Execution Environments. This panel is with all the previous speakers from the past talks, so NorSwap from Happy Chain, Terrence from Cartridge, Scott Sonardo from Argus Labs, Billy Rennekamp from Tripole Labs, and it's all moderated by Brahm from Maven 11. So this panel is with a whole bunch of seasoned on-chain game devs and NFT OGs. So this is more of an advanced talk around on-chain games with AI bots, interoperability like the metaverse move your sword to another game sort of example, and why NFTs haven't succeeded because of the technological and cultural gaps. And then finally at the end, their hot takes. Next up, we have creating a decentralized autonomous artist. What if AI was the artist? No, not just AI that makes the art, but itself would make the decisions of an artist. Decisions like the type of art, it would make the prompts, it would make thousands of random AI generations, and then a DAO would rate it to give a meeting and then sell it to fund and make more art. This talk is around an interesting AI experiment that has been running since 2021, called Bado, the Decentralized Autonomous Artist. Next up is a talk called After NFTs, Network Art in the Third Era. This talk is pretty weird. The speaker goes by 113. He's an anonymous artist without a presentation. It's just audio of him speaking. 113 talks about how we're entering a third era of art and cryptography. How physical art was gatekept by physical places and institutions, but now that place is the internet, and we should take it seriously as the ultimate art city. And how cryptography can be seen as the new art supplies, and how any artist can make art about society's problems without being gatekept or censored. How this era could pay artists fairly, and how even this digital art could live longer than the artists themselves. Now we're on to day 3 chisel stage, starting with why developers are building modular, not monolithic. Mads from Maven 11 talks about this meme against modularity, but building modular actually makes sense from multiple angles. He talks about the customization and specialization, the ownership and upgradability, scaling and cost reductions, security and risk management, and innovation and future-proofing. So those were just 5 quick bullet points from the talk, but skeptics should go watch the full video. Next up, we have Modular Anonymity Network. Harry Halpin from NIM talks about the importance of mixed nets. The internet wasn't exactly designed to be secure or anonymous, but we can add additional hops, noise, and latency to unlink our IP address and add anonymity. And he talks on how Celestia could use this for unlinkable data availability sampling. Next up, we have Deimos fixing E2E encryption using Celestia. This was one of my favorite talks because it's about a new actual application that solves a real-world problem. So Telegram, iMessage, WhatsApp, and even Signal pride themselves on privacy, but your messages aren't 100% private, and all end-to-end encryption isn't trust minimized. So your messages are encrypted, but in order to talk to someone else, you rely on a key directory that the service provider manages. Then Ryan talks about Deimos, which uses Celestia to have a trust minimized verifiable key directory. So this means not only are your messages encrypted, but you can verify through the key directory who you're talking to. Next up, we have sovereignty is all you need. Nick White and his Modular Mullet talk about a dev's hierarchy of needs, how devs crave to control all parts of the stack, and this craving is called sovereignty. From technical independence to social independence, sovereignty gives you complete ownership, but there are downsides of lower composability, increased complexity, and cost. But he explains through the Modular Mullet, we can provide abstraction, bridging, and DA layers can lower cost. Next up, we have Sovereigntists versus Globalists by Adrian Brink from Anoma. And this one was one of my favorite talks because it brings up just so much great points. Bitcoin wouldn't survive World War III because global fiber and satellite would likely be cut off. So even if we build for a large global decentralized network, that still is one centralized network that isn't World War III proof. Then Adrian emphasizes the importance of sovereignty, local networks, and running your own infra. Next up, we have a panel on EVM versus SVM versus ARM versus blended. This panel is about which VM is the best from infrastructure that uses each. We have Keone from Monad, which uses the EVM, Eugene Chen from Ellipsis that uses the SVM, Dimitri from Fluent that is blended, Chris Goes from Anoma that uses Intense, and all moderated by Rex from Blockworks. But first, before they even duke it out, they ask themselves what even is a VM in the first place, and then they have a debate on which VM is the best and what developers want. Next up, we have Don't Buy the Hype. John Cole from Hyperlane talks about how modular is hot right now and how contrarians love to hate the hottest thing, but he says you don't need to buy the hype and you can see it for yourself. John goes through the modular expansion, the statistics, the amount of rollups launching, but also how they're fragmented and how Hyperlane can help to connect them all. Next up, we have Rebuilding Rollups by Zon from Inisha. Zon talks about Inisha's L1 role for its L2s and how they can support and align their L2s through their vested interest program. He explains the VIP mechanisms on how they measure engagement and give out rewards, how the rewards are distributed, and 3 projects that are launching L2s on Inisha. Next up, we have Hyper-Bitcoinization through Modularity by Orkan from Citria. Orkan goes through hyper-Bitcoinization, how inflation's eating up your money, how Bitcoin is superior, and how Bitcoin will be the global reserve value. But Bitcoin can't scale by itself. So Citria is making a Bitcoin execution shard through Modularity. Next up we have Is Bitcoin Going Modular by Eric Wall from Taproot Wizards. Eric Wall talks about Bitcoin NFTs through ordinals, tokens on Bitcoin through runes, and proving that the Lightning Network can't scale. So then he talks about the new direction of Bitcoin using something called Opcat. Next up is a panel, Bitcoin Goes Modular. This panel has Orkan from Citria, Rena from Trust Machines, Connor O'Hara from Celestia Labs, all moderated by Andy from The Rollup. In this panel, they talk about Bitcoin being more than just a store of value. They go through the modular tech like BitVM and Opcat, and then talk about how Bitcoin maxis and whales and OGs and the overall community will feel about this new direction. Next up, we have Magic Block Engine, Emephrial rollups for real on-chain games on Solana. I'm not that big of a fan of Solana, but this is super cool. So a big problem with rollups is yes, they're fast, but they're not composable. So Magic Block built Emephrial rollups. They're rollups that get quickly deployed on Solana. They offer high performance that can be used in games. And then just as fast as they're deployed, these rollups can get deleted and users don't even know they left Solana. That's how fast and composable these new Emephrial rollups are. Then we're on to day 3 canvas stage with the bridge endgame liquidity for infinite chains by Jim Chang from Catalyst. Jim talks about the future of a million chains, but we must avoid modular chaos and go into modular enlightenment. But when we launch these new rollups, they're completely empty, so we need to import liquidity and bring solvers. But solvers are centralizing because of the high inventory cost. and Jim explains on how Catalyst's netting helps solve this problem. Next up, we have thinking outside the chain, how clearing layers can solve modular fragmentation. Arjun talks on how Everclear helps with bridging and chain abstraction by thinking outside the chain. Instead of making another interoperability messaging protocol, they instead built solvers with netting. This netting lowers the amount of liquidity needed for solvers, allowing for more solvers to compete in this clearing layer called Everclear. Next up is a panel on chain abstraction and the modular mullet. The panel has Chris Goes from Anoma, Karel from Union, Philippe from Li-Fi, Rishab from Stockit, Stan from Initia, moderated by Yuri from Signature Ventures. This panel is about chain abstraction. First, why and what it is, and then how chains will be abstracted, its impact on applications from financial to non-financial, and if we've pushed for all this efficiency, does this lead to more centralization or a standardized tech stack? Next up is Chain Abstraction, Chewing Glass to a Better Blockchain Ecosystem by Zaki Manian from Occlusion. Zaki goes through the way developers chew glass to make applications, and then he goes down the list of problems and current developments for asynchrony, coordination, interoperability, custody, incentives, and governance. And then he gives his abstracted vision on how users will interact with blockchains in the future. Next up is Lowering Consensus Confirmation Times by Dev from Osmosis. This is a nice technical talk on how to lower confirmation times. Dev talks about how to improve tenorment, on shifting pre-confirmation responsibilities to intents, and geolocalized DA layers with provable DA ingestion. As a tenorment enjoyer, I love this talk. Next up we have Blowing Up Modular Toll Booths by Barry Pluckett from Skip. The dream of every protocol is to be a black hole squid in the middle of networks that collects high fees from having a monopoly, whether it's interoperability, intent solvers, or bridging oracles. Barry talks on how we can kill the space octopus using go.skip.build. Next up is solving interoperability with cross-chain intents. Hart talks about the problem with interoperability is sending messages from chain to chain to prove you're able to move this money. This process can be insecure, expensive, and slow. He explains that the biggest use case for interoperability is cross-chain transfers. And like in real life, intents can have off-chain actors which take all this risk and front money for faster transfers. They can bundle lots of transactions together, lowering the fee for users, and users just don't have to think about it. This is how Across provides chain abstraction using intents. Next up we have the network layer for interoperability by Bodu from Polymer. Bo talks on how the internet has local networks called LAN and global networks called WAN, and this structure mimics L1s and L2s. The internet uses TCP/IP, and now we have the verifiable internet with blockchains, and we use IBC. Bo then talks about Polymer hubs, which route messaging between Rollups' local intranet and global internet using the inter-blockchain communication protocol, aka IBC. Next up we have Light Nodes Everywhere, Why and How by Connor O'Hara from Celestia Labs. So light nodes are cool because they let you verify data availability with just your phone, and there's pictures of people showing them off all around the world. But the point of them is to be boring everyday security measures like the padlock icon. We don't know what cryptography it's using for what security, but we do know it makes it more secure. And Connor talks on how we can make light nodes even lighter and embed them to everything. Next up we have Scaling Between the Layers, Unlocking Boundless Compute and the Next Generation of Verifiable Applications by Stephen Lee from RISC-0. Stephen talks about RISC-0's ability to boundlessly prove any Rust applications with ZK. This means you can write normal applications in Rust using normal Rust libraries. It doesn't have to be a blockchain-specific smart contracting language. Building a DEX in Solidity on Ethereum and then redeploying it on rollups is tedious, but instead you could just build an exchange like you normally would and use RISC-0 to prove any and multiple chains. Next up we have Giving a Verifiable Database to Every Smart Contract by Ismail from Lagrange. Ismail talks about Lagrange as a ZK coprocessor for verifiable databases. Smart contracts need to access data, but calling on-chain data is expensive. But using Lagrange, smart contracts can query about any database. A ZK proof is generated, then a smart contract just easily and gas efficiently verifies this proof about this data using Lagrange's ZK magic. Next up we have Nebra UPA, ZK Broadband Unlock Scaling, Privacy, and Interoperability by Shomo Chu from Nebra. Shomo talks about the Universal Proof Aggregator UPA. So proofs have all this use case, but they're expensive to verify. No one's going to use this technology if it costs $20 to pay for a $2 coffee. But Nebra can aggregate all these different types of proofs using their aggregator circuit. This unlocks better UX by having cheaper interoperability, cheaper transactions, and privacy. Next up we have a panel, Shielded Assets in the Modular Stack, with Henry from Penumbra and Connor from Celestia Labs. This is just a straight up shill on privacy and penumbra. And Connor asks questions about their stack. They talk about the development pains of integrating IBC with their custom Merkle trees, the process and philosophy of building penumbra, and then they dive into the features like the DEX, private proof of stake, and liquid delegation. After listening to this, I am penumbra pilled. Next up, we have one proof to rule them all, Mina's proof of everything. Brandon talks about Mina's blockchain being upside down. Using ZK proofs, they prove the last block's validity together with the new block to prove that the latest block and all the ones before it are valid. Mina was built with this recursive ZK proofs in mind, which means you're able to add more proofs, compose them together, and make one proof to rule them all. Next up, we have Signal versus Noise, Why AI Broke the Internet and How Cryptography is Going to Fix It by Tracy from Pluto. AI is making it hard to go through what's real and fake on the internet. Tracy talks about Pluto's approach using a privacy-preserving web of proofs. This gives users more control over their data, and this applies to the whole internet and not just blockchain. This allows you to exit systems and move your data, prove your identity, and sell anything like a tweet by generating a web proof. Next up, we have ZK accounts by NashQ from Celestia Labs. NashQ talks about the power of ZK accounts. So Celestia is lazy and doesn't want to add additional computation or complexity like smart contracts. ZK accounts allow for Celestia to do complex things in a trust-minimized fashion. Watch this talk to learn how it works, the proving mechanism, and all the use cases. Next up is a panel ZK applications with Anyush from ZK Email, Florent from Proof of Passport, Tracy from Pluto, and it's all moderated by Anna Rose from ZK Validator. This panel is about ZK applications and their adoption. They talk about ZK Email, Identity and Proof of Passport, and Web of Proofs, and the application's use case and unlock, allowing you to prove your identity, allow verification, and messaging without leaking your privacy. And that is it, the last talk of the last day of Modular Summit. Thank you so much for watching.